The midnight silence at Oak Ridge Airport shattered. Connor Hayes froze. Wheelchair wheels whispered across concrete, cutting through the emptiness like a ghost's lament. There, beneath the flickering fluorescent light, sat a vision that didn't belong. A girl. 14, maybe 15. Designer navy dress worth more than his truck. Blonde hair braided with Swiss precision, shoulders trembling, silent tears carving tracks down porcelain cheeks. She clutched a tiny Hermes bag against her chest like a lifeline. Connor's toolbox hit the floor with a metallic crash. His work boots thundered across the deserted terminal. The question ripped from his throat before reason could silence it. Why is she all alone? Blue-green eyes snapped up. Fear and desperate hope collided in her gaze. "I'm waiting for someone," she breathed, her voice carrying the polished cadence of Manhattan boarding schools. The departure board blinked 11:57. The terminal stretched empty in every direction, and Connor wondered if she was waiting for ghosts. Connor knelt beside the wheelchair, his calloused hands a stark contrast to the pristine chrome handles. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The endearment slipped out naturally, the way it did when he spoke to his own 8-year-old son Tyler back home in their cramped trailer. The girl hesitated, fingers tightening around her designer bag. "Natasha," she whispered, the name sounding rehearsed, practiced. "Natasha Collins." Connor's weathered face softened. 3 years of single parenthood had taught him to read the spaces between words, the tremor beneath brave facades. This wasn't defiance or teenage rebellion. This was terror wearing a silk dress. The airport security office had closed an hour ago. The last commercial flight had departed at 9:30, carrying tired businessmen and weekend visitors back to Atlanta. Oak Ridge wasn't the kind of place that attracted private jets or limousines. It was a working town, built around the regional airport that employed 200 families, Connor's included. He'd been finishing his shift as lead mechanic when the sound of those wheelchair wheels had stopped him cold. Now, studying this girl's face in the harsh terminal lighting, he felt the same protective instinct that had kept Tyler safe through scraped knees and nightmare-filled nights after his mother Rachel's death. "How long have you been waiting?" Connor asked gently. Natasha's eyes darted to the empty gate areas, to the shuttered coffee kiosks, anywhere but his face. "Not long," she said, but her voice cracked on the lie. The lobby chairs around her showed signs of prolonged occupation. A crumpled tissue lay beside her wheelchair. An empty water bottle sat forgotten on the armrest. Connor had worked enough late shifts to recognize the debris of a long, lonely vigil. He glanced at his watch. Midnight was approaching fast, and the airport would lock down completely at 1 a.m. No amount of designer clothing would change that reality. "Listen, Natasha," Connor said, settling his large frame into the chair beside her wheelchair. "I've got to level with you. This place shuts down tight in about an hour. No exceptions." Her composure cracked like ice under pressure. Fresh tears spilled over, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. "They'll come," she whispered fiercely. "Someone always comes." But even as she said it, her voice held the hollow ring of hope stretched too thin. Connor felt his heart break a little. He'd heard that same desperate certainty in Tyler's voice during those first terrible months after Rachel died, when his son would wait by the window, convinced his mother would walk through the door. The braided leather bracelet on Connor's wrist caught the fluorescent light, its worn surface polished smooth by 3 years of anxious touching. Rachel had made it from rope salvaged from her father's old sailboat, back when they'd believed in forever and happy endings. "Love isn't chains," she'd told him as she'd tied it around his wrist. "It's an anchor. It holds you steady, but it doesn't hold you back." Now, watching this broken girl clutch her expensive bag like a shield, Connor felt Rachel's words echo in the empty terminal. Sometimes love meant staying with strangers in fluorescent-lit limbo, even when every rational thought screamed to walk away. Connor pulled out his phone and dialed airport security. "Jim, it's Connor Hayes down in Terminal B. I've got a situation here." Natasha's eyes widened in panic, but Connor held up a calming hand. "A minor. Looks like she's been stranded. Can you swing by?" The conversation was brief, professional. Jim Martinez had been head of security for 15 years and had seen his share of travel nightmares. But when Connor described the girl, the expensive clothes, the wheelchair, Jim's tone shifted. "That's the third night this week, Connor. Same girl." Connor's blood chilled. 3 nights. This child had been abandoned here 3 times, and somehow no one had thought to dig deeper than the surface story of delayed pickups and travel mishaps. When Jim arrived, his usually jovial demeanor was replaced by grim concern. He'd brought coffee from the security office and a blanket that smelled faintly of industrial detergent. Natasha accepted both with the gracious politeness of someone raised in boardrooms and charity galas. "I've called social services," Jim said quietly, out of the girl's hearing range. "But they're swamped, and she's got proper ID, claims family contact. Without evidence of abandonment." Connor nodded. The system had cracks, and children fell through them daily. But looking at Natasha's carefully controlled expression, he suspected this wasn't simple neglect. This felt deliberate, calculated. Someone with resources had orchestrated this isolation. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like mechanical prayers. Connor watched Natasha sip her coffee with the precise movements of finishing school training, her spine never touching the wheelchair's back. Everything about her screamed privilege, from the pearl studs in her ears to the way she'd automatically thanked Jim in perfect French when he'd handed her the blanket. Yet here she sat, alone in a backwater airport at midnight, clutching hope that grew thinner by the hour. Tyler had inherited Rachel's ability to sleep anywhere when exhaustion took over, but this girl fought unconsciousness like it was an enemy. What nightmares, Connor wondered, lived behind those carefully composed features? At 12:30 a.m., Connor made a decision that would have terrified his careful, methodical nature under normal circumstances. "Natasha, you can't stay here alone. The airport locks down in 30 minutes. She looked up at him with eyes too old for her face. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she admitted, the words barely audible. Connor's chest tightened. "Yes, you do. My son Tyler would love to meet you, and we've got a spare room." It wasn't much. Their double-wide trailer on Elm Street was a far cry from whatever world had produced this polished child. But it was warm, safe, and filled with the kind of unconditional acceptance that had helped Tyler heal after loss. Sometimes, Connor thought, sanctuary came in unexpected packages. The drive to Connor's trailer took 15 minutes through Oak Ridge's sleeping streets. Natasha sat quietly in the passenger seat of his battered Ford pickup, her wheelchair secured in the back. She didn't comment on the fast food wrappers on the dashboard or the toy dinosaur wedged between the seats. Instead, she stared out the window at the modest homes with their darkened windows and economy cars, as if she were visiting an alien planet. "It's quiet here," she said finally, and Connor caught something like wonder in her voice. "Yeah," he replied, turning into the Oak Creek Mobile Home Park. Sometimes quiet is exactly what you need. Tyler was asleep when they arrived, sprawled across his twin bed, surrounded by airplane models and library books about flight mechanics. Connor had never hidden his work from his son. If anything, Tyler's fascination with aviation had grown from watching his father repair the machines that carried dreams across the sky. Now, as Connor gently shook his son awake to explain their unexpected guest, Tyler's sleepy confusion transformed into bright-eyed curiosity. "She's in a wheelchair like Grandpa was," Tyler whispered, referencing Connor's father who'd lived with them briefly before his death. "Can she see my airplane collection?" At 8 years old, Tyler's world was still large enough to accommodate miracles and mysterious visitors without question. The spare room had been Rachel's craft space, still decorated with her watercolor paintings of local wildflowers. Connor had converted it after her death, unable to bear the sight of her unfinished projects, but unwilling to erase them entirely. Now, as Natasha wheeled herself carefully between the twin bed and the small desk, Connor watched her fingers trace the edge of a painting depicting Tennessee black-eyed Susans in full bloom. "She was talented," Natasha said quietly, and Connor wondered what instinct had told her these were painted by someone no longer present. "She was everything good in the world," Connor replied simply, the words carrying 3 years of grief worn smooth by acceptance. The next morning brought the kind of golden October light that made Oak Ridge look like a Norman Rockwell painting. Connor woke to the sound of voices from the kitchen, Tyler's animated chatter mixing with Natasha's softer responses. He found them at the small dining table, Tyler demonstrating the aerodynamics of paper airplanes, while Natasha watched with the intense focus of someone discovering joy for the first time. "Connor!" Tyler called out. "Natasha knows about jet engines, real stuff, not just the simple things." Connor poured coffee and studied his unexpected houseguest. Overnight, some of the tension had left her shoulders, but her eyes still held the wariness of someone prepared for disappointment. Over pancakes and maple syrup, the edges of Natasha's story began to emerge. She spoke carefully, choosing words like stepping stones across dangerous water. Her father was in aviation business. She'd been traveling, but there had been complications. Family was busy with work. Tyler, with the directness of childhood, asked why she used a wheelchair. "I was in a car accident," Natasha said simply. "Sometimes things break and don't heal quite the same way." Tyler nodded solemnly, then brightened. "But your brain didn't break, right? Because you know all about planes." Natasha's laugh was surprised and genuine, the first truly unguarded sound Connor had heard from her. The call came while Tyler was at school and Natasha was reading in Rachel's chair by the window. Connor recognized the number from the previous night, airport security. But Jim's voice carried a tension that made Connor's stomach clench. "We ran those plates on the Mercedes that's been circling the airport," Jim said without preamble. "Corporate registration, Whitfield Aviation. Connor, that's not just any aviation company. That's Charles Whitfield, the billionaire." The name hit Connor like a physical blow. Even in small-town Tennessee, everyone knew about Whitfield Aviation, the corporate giant that had been buying up regional airports across the South. The same company that had been sending representatives to Oak Ridge, asking pointed questions about land values and development potential. Connor's hand tightened on the phone as pieces began clicking into place. "Jim, what exactly has Whitfield Aviation been doing around here?" The security chief's ande was audible. "Officially? Evaluating regional air traffic patterns. Unofficially? Word is they're planning something big. Resort development, maybe. The kind of project that would mean..." Connor finished the sentence in his mind. The kind of project that would mean the end of Oak Ridge Regional Airport as they knew it. The end of 200 jobs, the end of everything he'd built since Rachel's death. And somehow, impossibly, the frightened girl reading quietly in his living room was connected to it all. That afternoon, while Tyler played video games and Natasha helped with his math homework, Connor found himself watching her with new eyes. The way she unconsciously straightened when the phone rang. How she seemed to know technical aviation terms that even some of his experienced mechanics struggled with. The careful way she avoided specific questions about her family, while displaying knowledge that suggested intimate familiarity with corporate aircraft. Natasha, Connor said gently, settling into the chair across from her. I think we need to have a real conversation. Her face went very still, and for a moment she looked far older than her 14 years. You know, don't you? Natasha said quietly, her hands folding precisely in her lap. Connor nodded. Some of it. Your father is Charles Whitfield. She flinched as if the name caused physical pain. He's not just my father, she whispered. He's going to destroy everything here. This airport, your job, all of it, and I... Her voice broke completely. I tried to stop him. I've been trying for weeks, but he won't listen to me. I'm just his broken daughter who can't walk anymore, not worth listening to. The raw pain in her voice made Connor's chest ache. This child had been carrying the weight of her father's business decisions like stones in her pockets. Tyler's excited voice carried from the kitchen where he was building something elaborate with Legos. Connor! Natasha! Come see what I made! But neither adult moved. The revelation hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they could cross. How did you end up at the airport? Connor asked gently. Natasha's laugh was bitter, too sophisticated for her age. I've been running away for 3 days, taking cabs, hiding in hotels, trying to figure out how to make him understand what this place means to people like you. She gestured around the modest trailer with its mismatched furniture and family photos. People with real lives, not just stock portfolios and board meetings. But why here specifically? Connor pressed. Natasha's eyes filled with tears. Because I wanted to see it myself. The place he's going to bulldoze for his resort project. I wanted to understand what he was destroying. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. And then you found me. And Tyler showed me his airplane models. And you let me sleep in your wife's room, surrounded by her paintings. And now I understand what Dad doesn't. This isn't just a piece of property. It's home. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them had expected when Connor had first approached a crying girl in an empty airport. Evening brought rain, and the kind of cozy atmosphere that made the trailer feel larger than its physical dimensions. Tyler had convinced Natasha to help him build a blanket fort in the living room, and their laughter provided a soundtrack to Connor's internal struggle. Every paternal instinct urged him to protect this broken child who'd found refuge in their simple life. But every practical bone in his body whispered warnings. Charles Whitfield didn't just own aviation companies, he owned politicians, lawyers, and enough influence to crush a small-town mechanic without breaking a sweat. Harboring his runaway daughter could be seen as kidnapping, or worse. The knock on the door came at 8:30 p.m., sharp and authoritative. Through the window, Connor could see black SUVs lined up on Elm Street like mechanical vultures. Men in expensive suits stood in the rain, their presence transforming the quiet neighborhood into something that felt like a crime scene. Natasha went white, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair so tightly her knuckles showed bone pale in the lamplight. He found me, she whispered, the words carrying defeat and terror in equal measure. Tyler looked between the adults, confusion clouding his features. Who found you? He asked. But Connor was already moving toward the door, his mind racing through impossible calculations. Charles Whitfield stood on Connor's narrow porch like a shark in a goldfish bowl. Everything about him radiated power and barely controlled fury, from his $1,000 suit to the cold intelligence behind his gray eyes. He was shorter than Connor had expected, but presence made up for physical stature. Behind him stood 2 men who were clearly security, their hands resting casually near their jacket openings. Mr. Hayes. Whitfield's voice was cultured, precise, and absolutely without warmth. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Connor stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. "I have a frightened child who needed shelter," he replied evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less." "That frightened child," Whitfield's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "is my daughter. She's been missing for 3 days, and I find her here, in a trailer park, being harbored by a man with access to detailed information about airport operations." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Connor felt his temper flare, but years of single parenthood had taught him to control emotional responses when Tyler's welfare was at stake. "Sir, your daughter showed up at the airport alone and terrified. I did what any decent person would do." Whitfield's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Decent people call social services, Mr. Hayes. They don't take disabled children home like stray cats." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Connor's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, the trailer door opened behind him. Natasha wheeled herself onto the porch, her chin raised in defiance despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dad, stop," she said quietly. "He saved me. Tyler and Connor gave me something I've never had before." Whitfield's expression softened fractionally when he saw his daughter, but his voice remained steel. "What I gave you was everything money could buy, Alexandra. The best doctors, the finest schools, every opportunity." Alexandra. So even her name had been a lie, another wall between her true self and a world she'd been afraid to trust with the truth. "You gave me everything except what I actually needed." Alexandra shot back, her voice stronger now. "A father who listened? A family who cared more about my feelings than my trust fund? Tyler treats me like I'm a person, not a responsibility to be managed." Whitfield's jaw tightened. "Tyler is 8 years old? He doesn't understand the complexities of your medical needs, your security requirements, the responsibilities that come with being a Whitfield." Connor watched this family drama unfold with growing understanding. This wasn't just about a runaway child. This was about a father so terrified of losing his daughter that he'd built a prison around her, made of good intentions and suffocating care. Tyler appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes and looking small in his dinosaur pajamas. "What's happening?" he asked sleepily, then spotted the black SUVs through the rain. "Whoa, are those FBI cars?" Under different circumstances, Connor might have smiled at his son's excitement. Instead, he knelt down to Tyler's eye level. "Remember we talked about how sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems? This is one of those times." Tyler nodded solemnly, then looked at Alexandra. "Are you leaving?" And the simple question, asked without guile or agenda, seemed to hit Charles Whitfield like a physical blow. For the first time since his arrival, the billionaire's composure cracked slightly as he looked at his daughter's tear-stained face. "Yes, sweetie," Alexandra whispered to Tyler. "I have to go home now." But even as she said it, her eyes met Connor's with desperate appeal. This trailer, these people who treated her like a normal teenager rather than a corporate heir to be protected and managed, had become more real to her than the mansion and staff she'd grown up with. "Can we stay friends?" Tyler asked with the innocence that made Connor's heart ache. "Can you come have dinner again?" Whitfield's voice cut through the tender moment like a blade. "That won't be possible. Alexandra has responsibilities, medical appointments, tutors. Her schedule is quite full." The words built another wall, brick by brick, around his daughter's shrinking world. The next morning brought headlines that made Connor's blood run cold. "Local mechanic under investigation for child endangerment. Whitfield Aviation executive's daughter found in questionable circumstances." The articles were careful to stop just short of outright accusations, but the implication was clear. Connor Hayes was either a predator or an opportunist, possibly both. His phone rang constantly with reporters seeking statements. His supervisor at the airport called to inform him he was suspended pending internal investigation. Tyler's school wanted to discuss the situation that was affecting his son's environment. 3 days after taking in a frightened child, Connor's life was systematically being dismantled by forces far beyond his ability to fight. Tyler didn't understand why his father spent so much time on the phone with lawyers they couldn't afford, or why neighbors had stopped waving when they drove past. But he understood that Alexandra was gone, and that her absence had left a hole in their little family that felt surprisingly large for someone they'd known less than a week. "Is she okay?" Tyler asked over cereal that neither of them was really eating. Connor wished he had an answer that wouldn't break his son's heart further. "I don't know, buddy. I hope so." But privately, Connor feared that Alexandra was drowning in the gilded cage her father had rebuilt around her, and that his own attempt to help had only made her prison more secure. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while Tyler was at school, and Connor was staring at a stack of legal documents that might as well have been written in Sanskrit. The voice on the other end was small, frightened, and achingly familiar. "Connor, it's Alexandra. I'm using a phone at the hospital, and I don't have much time." Connor's heart slammed against his ribs. "Hospital? Alexandra, what happened?" Her words came out in a rush. "Tyler's sick. Really sick. Pneumonia. He's at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital in Nashville, and you need to get here now. I'm taking care of the bills, but he needs you. He keeps asking for you and his dad, Connor, and I told them you were coming." Connor's world tilted sideways. Tyler had seemed fine that morning, maybe a little tired, but kids got tired. How had a few hours turned into a life-threatening emergency? "How did you know?" Connor managed to ask through the panic clawing at his throat. "I have people watching," Alexandra said simply. "Dad thinks it's for security, but I use them to keep track of the people I care about. Connor, Tyler is really scared, and the doctors need to talk to you about treatment options. There's an ambulance helicopter coming to get you. Don't argue. Just come." The line went dead, leaving Connor staring at his phone and processing the impossible reality that a 14-year-old girl he'd known for less than a week was orchestrating his son's medical care from whatever prison her father had built around her. The helicopter ride to Nashville passed in a blur of terrain and terror. Connor had never been in an aircraft smaller than a commercial jet, and the machine's mechanical precision reminded him painfully of the engines he repaired daily. But all of that faded when he burst into the pediatric intensive care unit and saw Tyler connected to machines that beeped and hummed with electronic vigilance. His son looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, oxygen mask fogging with each labored breath. And beside him, holding Tyler's hand like a lifeline, sat Alexandra in her wheelchair. She'd somehow managed to get to Nashville, to be there when Tyler needed someone, to bridge the gap between Connor's working-class desperation and the level of medical care that could save his son. "Dad!" Tyler's voice was weak, but filled with relief. Connor crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering his son into an embrace that was part desperate love and part terror of letting go. "I knew you'd come," Tyler whispered against his father's shoulder. "Alexandra said you would, and she knows about everything." Over his son's head, Connor met Alexandra's eyes. The gratitude he felt was too large for words, but she seemed to understand anyway. "The doctors say he's going to be fine," she said quietly. But it was close. Without immediate intervention, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Connor understood that his son's life had been saved by a teenage girl who'd found a way to care for them, even from within her father's fortress of protection. Dr. Martinez was young, competent, and carefully neutral as she explained Tyler's condition and treatment plan. Acute pneumonia, caught early enough to treat aggressively, but serious enough to require several days of intensive care. The cost, she mentioned with professional detachment, would be substantial. Insurance would cover some of it, but the gap would be significant. Connor felt the familiar weight of financial impossibility settling on his shoulders. He was still suspended from work, facing legal bills, and now medical expenses that would probably bankrupt them both. Actually, Alexandra interrupted quietly, all expenses have been covered by the Whitfield Foundation. Tyler is considered a special case. Connor started to protest, but Alexandra's look silenced him. "Let me do this," she said simply. "It's the only good thing I can do with that name right now." That night, Connor slept in the chair beside Tyler's bed, while Alexandra maintained her own vigil from her wheelchair. They didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Two people who'd found family in unexpected places, now keeping watch over the child who'd brought them together. Around 3 a.m. Tyler stirred and looked around the dimly lit room. "Are we all staying together now?" he asked sleepily. Alexandra reached over and smoothed his hair with the gentle touch of someone discovering how to love without conditions. "For as long as we can, sweetie," she whispered. And for the first time in days, Connor allowed himself to believe that might be more than just wishful thinking. The second day brought Charles Whitfield to the hospital, looking haggard and older than his 55 years. He found Connor in the cafeteria during one of Tyler's nap periods, sitting alone with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Without invitation, Whitfield sat down across from him. The billionaire looked nothing like the polished corporate shark who'd stood on Connor's porch making threats. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled, and his eyes held the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from fighting battles that couldn't be won with money or influence. "My daughter hasn't left this hospital in 48 hours," Whitfield said quietly. "She's slept in that wheelchair, eaten vending machine food, and refused every attempt to make her more comfortable. All for your son." Connor studied the man across from him, seeing something he hadn't expected. A father wrestling with his own failures. "Tyler means a lot to her," Connor said carefully. Whitfield nodded slowly. "She's never had friends her own age. The accident, it changed everything. I thought I was protecting her, but I was just building walls." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've spent 2 years trying to give Alexandra everything she needed to be happy. Private tutors, medical specialists, therapists, companions, everything except what she actually wanted." Connor waited, sensing that Charles Whitfield was approaching something that might matter. "A family," the billionaire continued. "She wanted a family, not staff or employees or people paid to care about her welfare. She wanted people who chose to love her. She's got that," Connor said simply. "With or without your approval." Whitfield's smile was sharp with self-awareness. "I know. And that terrifies me more than any corporate takeover or financial crisis I've ever faced." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Do you have any idea what it's like to realize that your daughter's happiest moment in 2 years was eating pancakes in a trailer with people she'd known for 12 hours? Connor thought about Tyler's face when he'd introduced Alexandra, the way his son had simply accepted her presence as a gift rather than an obligation. "Yeah," Connor said. "I think I do." The conversation that followed wasn't the negotiation Connor had expected. Instead, it was something rarer and more valuable. Two fathers admitting their failures and trying to figure out how to do better. Whitfield talked about the accident that had taken his daughter's mobility and nearly taken her life. how his response to that trauma had been to control every variable, eliminate every risk, until Alexandra's world had shrunk to the size of a luxury prison. Connor shared his own story of loss, how Rachel's death had taught him that love sometimes meant letting people make their own choices, even when those choices involved risk or pain or the possibility of loss. "I've made mistakes," Whitfield said finally. "With Alexandra, with this airport situation, with a lot of things. The resort project. It wasn't about money. It was about creating something lasting, something that would secure Alexandra's future. But I never asked what kind of future she actually wanted." Connor felt a spark of hope. It's not too late to ask her now. Whitfield's laugh was rueful. "Have you tried changing course when you're piloting a corporate jet at 30,000 feet? It's technically possible, but the logistics are challenging." Connor grinned, the first genuine smile he'd managed in days. "Good thing I know something about fixing aircraft that have gotten off course." Alexandra's recovery plan began with small changes that felt like revolutions. Instead of returning to the Whitfield estate, she asked to stay in a hotel near the hospital until Tyler was released. Instead of private tutors, she wanted to enroll in Oak Ridge High School. Instead of professional companions, she wanted to spend time with Tyler, helping with his homework and learning to be part of a family that didn't require appointments or scheduling. Charles Whitfield, perhaps for the first time in his corporate life, said yes to demands that couldn't be quantified in spreadsheets or profit margins. The airport project underwent its own transformation. Rather than bulldozing Oak Ridge Regional for resort development, Whitfield Aviation announced a partnership with the community to modernize and expand the facility. Connor found himself promoted from suspended mechanic to consulting manager, helping design improvements that would preserve jobs while creating new opportunities. Tyler got his own hard hat and clipboard, appointed as junior aviation consultant in recognition of his extensive knowledge of paper airplane aerodynamics. Alexandra divided her time between physical therapy, high school classes, and what she called learning to be a normal teenager, which apparently involved a lot of giggling with classmates and teaching Tyler increasingly complex origami techniques. 6 months later, Connor stood in the same terminal where he'd first encountered a frightened girl in a wheelchair. But everything had changed. The space was brighter now, modernized, but still carrying the warmth of a community gathering place. Tyler raced between the renovated gates, pointing out improvements to anyone who'd listen, while Alexandra followed at a more sedate pace, her wheelchair decorated with stickers Tyler had applied with artistic enthusiasm. Charles Whitfield maintained a careful distance, learning to be present without controlling, to offer support without building cages. The leather bracelet on Connor's wrist had acquired new meaning over the months. Rachel's anchor was still there, holding him steady in the current of unexpected change. But now it also carried the weight of new responsibilities, new love, new understanding of how families could be built from choice rather than chance. Alexandra wore a similar bracelet now, woven from parachute cord and decorated with small metal charms that Tyler had selected, an airplane, a heart, and a tiny anchor. "So you don't drift away," he'd explained with 8-year-old logic that cut straight to the truth of things. The evening sun slanted through the terminal windows, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. Tyler had fallen asleep in one of the waiting area chairs, exhausted by a day of helping with the final renovation inspections. Alexandra sat nearby, reading a book for her American history class while keeping one eye on the sleeping boy. Connor watched them both, these two children who'd found their way into his heart through different doors, but with equal claim on his affection. Charles Whitfield approached quietly, carrying coffee for the adults and a juice box for Tyler when he woke up. "I never thanked you properly," Whitfield said, settling into a chair beside Connor. for seeing past the wheelchair to the child who needed saving. Connor shook his head. She saved herself, and probably saved Tyler and me in the process. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Alexandra help Tyler with his history homework, while other passengers moved through the terminal with the relaxed urgency of people going places they wanted to be. "This is what normal looks like," Whitfield observed quietly. "I'd forgotten." Connor smiled. "Normal is overrated anyway. Family is what matters." And in the golden light of an October evening, surrounded by the sounds of a working airport and the laughter of children, that felt like the truest thing he'd ever said. The intercom crackled with the evening's final boarding announcement, and Tyler stirred in his chair, blinking sleepily at the adults around him. "Are we going home now?" he asked, the question carrying layers of meaning that went beyond physical locations. Alexandra reached over and took his hand, her grip steady and sure. "Yeah, sweetie," she said softly. "We're going home." And as they gathered their things and headed toward the parking lot, Connor realized that home had become something larger and more complicated than the trailer on Elm Street, but also something infinitely more valuable. It had become the place where three damaged people had found ways to heal each other, where love had grown in the spaces between loss and hope, and where family had been redefined by choice rather than circumstance. The airport lights flickered on as dusk settled over Oak Ridge, illuminating runways that would carry other people's dreams into the sky. But for Connor Hayes, Alexandra Whitfield, and Tyler Hayes, the most important journey was the one that had brought them together in this small Tennessee town, where a question asked in kindness had unlocked doors none of them had known they were searching for. Sometimes, Connor reflected as they walked toward the truck, the most extraordinary adventures began with the simplest acts of human decency, and sometimes, when you were brave enough to ask why someone was alone, you discovered that none of us had to be.